Susan.
Hi, Katie.
Hi, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to hear about your story and your journey and kind of what you are doing and working with women after the age of 50. But first, let's start out with your diagnosis. You were diagnosed in August of 2022, correct?
Yes, I was looking back at my notes. It was actually the end of July, but yes.
Yeah. Well, I feel like there's like a self-diagnosis date and then there's the
Yes.
official diagnosis date, right?
Yes. So the self-diagnosis was earlier in 2022.
Yeah.
So, but thank you for having me, first of all.
Yeah.
Having me on.
So you had, so your daughter was diagnosed first, and she's in college. Is she still at college?
Yeah, she's almost 21, and she's at U of M. And so what happened was early in 2022, she just came over one day and said, with a lot of emotion, I'm pretty sure I have ADHD, just kind of out of the blue. And I didn't have this on my radar at all for myself or for her, or just, I was just like, okay. And she had a very long list of all the reasons, all the symptoms, which looking back now, I kind of get that. I feel like, you know, once you have that self-diagnosis and you really think you have it, there's this fear of someone not hearing that or dismissing it in some way. So she had done all of her homework and she listed all these things, and I recognized all of it in her. I mean, I was like, yep, I totally see that. And then I said, and these are symptoms of ADHD? Question mark. And yes, and she informed me that she had gotten sort of a TikTok diagnosis. That's where she sort of first came across it. And then a roommate, that they kind of had similar ways that they approach things. And a roommate found out she had ADHD. And so anyhow, one thing led to another. And so we kind of talked about her getting tested, and that was that. And then we had a second conversation a couple days later, and I had some time to think about this. And I just said, you know, I'm thinking it's possible that I might have ADHD as well. And she said, well, I didn't want to say anything, but I'm pretty sure you have ADHD, and here's why. And she proceeded to talk about, you know, all the appointments we've missed and been on the wrong day, wrong time, wrong place, you know, hauling them out of school for a doctor's appointment that's, you know, next week, and, you know, and various things. So, and then she mentioned something which kind of just was a big light bulb. She's like, when you grow up in a family that has ADHD, how do you notice if you think everybody's the same way? Because then I thought, oh my God, my mother completely, like, we nicknamed her Hurricane Gladys. I'm pretty sure my brother, you know, so she's like, you know, I thought that everybody always just talked all over each other and interrupted themselves and just, but that's not necessarily how everyone, you know, talks or dinner. We just, you know, completely talk all over each other. So anyhow, that made a lot of sense. And so then I pursued my own evaluation, pretty sure I had it. And I got a recommendation from my therapist for an integrative practice that does assessments. And I had an intake call. And then I did end up having like the whole full-blown, you know, 4-hour complete psychological profile testing. And then shortly after that, I had like an hour consultation kind of with the raw data. They actually produced like a multi-page report that takes about 3 months, but they'll kind of get back to you with what their initial findings were. And so I just remember talking to him, and they're a very trauma-aware practice, integrative. So he was very, you know, softly talking about trauma and the trauma spectrum and how it relates to ADHD, and, you know, whether you had it as a child when you were born, or whether there were experiences that, you know, do actually change your brain in the same way. And I didn't know where he was going with this. And I just welled up with tears, and I was just like, but I don't even remember what I said, but it was a but. And he just said, don't worry. It's okay. I'm going to give you an ADHD diagnosis. And I was just like so flooded with relief. And where he was going with that was really just like the more comprehensive way that one can address it, not only with medication, but with therapy and supplements and, all sorts of other things.
Endless conversations about ADHD on a podcast. That's my treatment plan.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Well, it is a theme, I think, that we explore a lot on this podcast, is the theme of trauma, right? And so many of us have experienced it in our lives, either overtly, either as women, either sexual trauma or sexist trauma. Or racial trauma. Like, there's so many issues that many of us have experienced, but then also the other sort of small t traumas around living a life undiagnosed, which was all of these ways in which we experience shame for executive dysfunction behaviors. And so then it's like a chicken or egg thing. Did the ADHD cause the trauma, or did the trauma cause the ADHD? And really trying to figure all of that out. But I don't think it's a coincidence that many of us have a lot of trauma in our past that we have to untangle.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And, and as a result too, there's so much overlap with ADHD symptoms, not entirely, but, 80% overlap with anxiety and depression and trauma responses. So it's really hard to sort out, and in my case, I was going through a lot of therapy, and I do have anxiety and trauma responses. And so but everything could be addressed in that context, except for the executive dysfunctioning, which didn't really come up because it just wasn't something that, I don't know. It just didn't, it wasn't something I brought up. So
I want to get back to your daughter so many of us who maybe are a bit older than your daughter, who are diagnosed in adulthood, get pushback from our parents, like what you said, which is, well, everybody's like that, or, that's just our family, or we're just quirky. Don't be ridiculous. These are, it's not ADHD. You're just, lazy. And I think a lot of that comes from feeling attacked, right? As parents, like, oh, I didn't see this, and I didn't realize this was happening, and I didn't realize you were struggling as much as you were. And so now I feel like I'm a bad parent. I feel like I'm under attack. Did you feel any of that in her journey, or how this kind of unfolded?
I never felt attacked, and I never was inclined at all to question what she was bringing to me. And I fully recognized everything she said. I did feel bad that I didn't know enough to recognize the symptoms, because she had a really hard time in high school. And it wasn't until college, when you have no structure that you have with a family, and you suddenly have to figure it all out on your own. So I think, we had some tears. I think when she recognizes her diagnosis and she looks back, and it's like, if only I knew, and I wish I had known, but I didn't feel attacked in any way. And, I did the best I could with the knowledge I had. And, she's the one that brought it to me. So I'm just thankful for that, because I would still be oblivious, I think, if she had not brought that forward.
Right. Yeah. No, you bring up a good point, which is that you're sort of dealing with the grief doubly, right? Because so many of us experience that grief of, like, once we are diagnosed well into adulthood, of the life we could have lived, or why didn't anybody see the signs, or why didn't I get the help I needed, right? But then you also, as a parent, then have to have the extra layer of grief of, did I fail, not fail, but like, why didn't I see this in my child, or how could things have been differently there?
Yeah, for sure.
Now, why did you decide to go with the like full blown diagnostic testing? Was it just you just needed to know?
I don't know. I don't know if it was just like extra validation I needed. There's just this panic that someone's gonna not, say maybe you don't have it. Like I was scared of just going to my PCP and, just sort of being dismissed or, I think I would doubt it if I just kind of did assessment, because I'd already done assessments online and I was like off the charts. So I don't know, it may have been overblown, but I just kind of felt like at the time I needed, more confirmation and just to feel solidly, because it was so new to me. And, it's a big deal. I was 56, so it's just kind of mind blowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, right? And I think, for me, my diagnosis was from like a half-hour conversation with my GP. And one of the things I've talked about was how like I always feel like I wish I had an official card in my wallet or something that could counteract so much of my own confusion and self-doubt around, do I really have this? And still years later, I'm like, there's these moments where I'm like, I don't know, did I just misconstrue this whole thing? Is this something else? Am I, did I fool my doctor? All of those conversations, all of those thoughts that go through our minds. And when my kids, I had my kids for the same, similar to you. When I had my kids tested, I went for like the full gamut, because there was, I wanted to have a lot of that confirmation and validation moving forward with them, because there is a part of me that's always like, I don't know, am I reading this wrong? Is this, is this ADHD or is this something else? I think is the question I'm always asking.
Yeah, I think I anticipated that I'd have those questions for myself. And so I just kind of wanted to nip it in the bud. And I do feel like I have all this data if anyone were to ever ask or question, which I don't think anyone will, but it's like, well, let me show you my, 10-page report here and read sections, this and this and this, and tell me if you have any questions. Yeah.
I took the more roundabout route of just delving into it and making it my life's work. Now I'm like, I hope I actually have ADHD. It would be really embarrassing if I didn't. Now, what was my question about something about the testing? Oh, I lost my train of thought. Oh, well. Now I know what it was. A lot of women who are over the age of 50, I think, have the question of like, how is it important to get a diagnosis? Or even their doctor says you've managed this long. What's the point of getting a diagnosis? You seem like you're okay, right? Like you figured out the structures that you need and whatever. Like, what's the point of a diagnosis? And I always feel like it's tremendously validating. I want to hear from you. Like you mentioned when you reached out to me that it was life-changing. And so what does that mean for you?
Yeah, I felt like it's another layer of understanding myself. And I had done so much self-discovery, but there just felt like there was still something off and I didn't know what it was. And so, I was pretty sure this was it. And I just really wanted to understand that. And quite honestly, I was excited about the prospect of getting some medication to see what that could do, because I had a very hard to focus and follow through on anything, and that was what ultimately was such a big change is getting on some medication and trying that and having this ability to focus and get things done. And it just sort of opened up this world of possibility for me of what I'm actually capable of, and I'd always had this sense that I wasn't living up to my potential in some way, that I just couldn't do certain things. And this was just, a whole nother level of understanding. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I feel like a common sentiment among adults with ADHD is never feeling like we are grown up. And I was always, figuring out like, what is that about? Like, I think on the one hand, people with ADHD tend to, because we're interest driven, right? We tend to have like a youthful enthusiasm about certain things. And then you combine that with the executive dysfunction and feeling generally kind of terrible about, or we're generally not good at quote unquote adult things like budgeting and planning and remembering people's birthdays and that kind of thing. Is that something that a theme that you would have said in your own life in terms of feeling like?
Yes, definitely. I have always felt like, that I'm not quite grown up and that, I don't know how to do these things. And, how did I raise children, and I still can't do the laundry. And, thank God for automatic bill payment, because that saved my credit score. Kind of all a sense of what do I want to be when I grow up, which is also something actually coincidentally I hear from women over 50 in general. But yeah, and I think you touched on, at least what I was taking from it was the idea of like the passion sort of being very almost childlike, with the sort of hyper focus and just getting so excited about a million different things. It definitely resonates with me.
Right? Yeah. It seems to be something many of us share, which is like, we never got the manual. We never got the grown-up manual.
Yeah, for sure.
So, all right. Okay. And now I'm curious about the medication part. What medication are you on? Is it a stimulant or is it a non-stimulant? What did you end up with?
It is. I've been on dextroamphetamine, which is one of two components of Adderall. So it's a little less strong, and we tried that first because it often tends to have a less of a crash effect than Adderall. So I've been on that. We just kind of toyed with the dosage, but that's worked really well. I'm sure you're probably aware that there's a stimulant supply issue globally. So Adderall's been hard to find for a long time, and a lot of the others. Dextroamphetamine was fine until just this last time I had to refill. That's totally out of stock now. And the only thing they could get was Adderall extended release. So I'm taking that right now. I don't know if I'll stay on that or go back when the supply issue is fixed. But
Interesting. Because I feel like that's another thing I hear a lot for women over the age of 50. I don't know if it's 50 is just sort of the cutoff, or if there's actual physiological reasons. But a lot of doctors for women over the age of 50 will discourage stimulants, right? And they try to like root women toward the non-stimulant antidepressants and that kind of thing. And I don't know if it's like a physiological reason in terms of cardiac issues, or if there's more of a like, you're probably just a depressed woman who thinks you have ADHD, right? Like that kind of pat on the head, like, yeah, sure, we'll treat your ADHD. And so I was curious, I tried stimulant medication right away, but never really, it didn't work for me. I don't know. I felt like the side effects were a little too much. I just felt agitated a lot of the time. So I loved how quiet my brain was, but I also sort of felt a lot of, I don't know, like just, it was hard to describe it. Just sort of like just like antsy in my skin and a lot of that stuff and I ended up going off of it. But it's been working so well for my daughter that I was like, maybe I was on too high of a dose. Maybe I should have gone on a lower dose. I don't know. I feel like it's a full-time job.
We have the opposite, actually. So it's working for me, but my daughter was like, I can't, it's just too much. She just felt like you, just completely agitated, like her heart was going, and she was just on fire, and she just didn't like the way it made her feel. And she also experienced pretty significant crashes. So, but I didn't get any resistance from the psychiatrist's office, and they're an integrative health place as well. So they, they're considering everything. They're not just sort of throw you the medication and talk to you later. And they were suggested the stimulant to try it. But I did read something about maybe over the age of 65, and I sort of saw that, and then I began to panic, like, what am I going to do then? And I just decided to put that down. I'm going to worry about that later. So maybe by then I'll be able to, manage without. We'll see.
Now, it wasn't your diagnosis that prompted the career change, right? This was all kind of happening at the same time. You had already decided to go through this massive life change, and then you're like, oh, okay, now it makes sense why I'm doing this, right?
Yeah, I had, I knew I needed to make a change, and I just really wasn't sure what I could do. You have a creative practice, which I kind of thought about trying to do something with that, but I didn't want to, ruin something that I do just for joy, and try to monetize it somehow. And that would be a very long game. And so, I just remember just thinking, I need to make a change, partly because of my late in life divorce. My retirement plans have just completely gone out the window, right? So, whereas I might have been able to stop earlier, now it's a longer time frame, and I just thought I can't continue this work for that long. And so I was just thinking, and coaching had come across my radar, and I thought, I wonder if there was just someone I could talk to about like my passions and my interests and what I like to do and what's meaningful for me and how I might be able to put something together. And then I just suddenly thought, or I could be that person and be that coach and help people like me who've had, maybe similar history and experience and kind of are at this point in life and, wondering if they're enjoy what they're doing. Do they feel like it's meaningful? And so I was on that path, and I signed up for a program, which I just absolutely loved, the Holistic Coach Training Institute, and I just knew that it was something I was passionate about. But my idea was to kind of do it as a side hustle sort of thing for a while. But once I got the diagnosis, and then once I was on stimulants, two things. One, I realized that I would never be able to really get this off the ground working like I was, because I was just so drained, and just the time and the energy. But really, for the first time, I just had the confidence that, like, I can do this. I can start a business. I can follow through. I mean, there's an excitement to being an entrepreneur. There's a little piece of me that is hoping that this, isn't some flash in the pan passion. But I don't think so. It's been sustained for a while now. But it was really just kind of the confidence kick that allowed me to kind of make that big, huge step. And so many things, almost everything in my life had changed, except for this very long time career. I'm maybe in a minority that I'd actually been in the same position for 26 years.
Well, I think those of us who did have steady careers, you can see some of the patterns there in terms of how creative the industry was, if you were able to do different jobs within that. Like, you can see sort of ways in which there are certain jobs that have built-in interest, right? And so it's like, yeah, you were in the same industry or maybe in the same career, but it was like the career itself was fluid. And so I'm guessing, well, you tell me, what were you were in the commercial furniture industry, right?
Right. Commercial interior. So yeah, that's very true. I have a design background. And although I was in a sales capacity, I just worked in these beautiful spaces, just gorgeous. And, we worked with clients on the whole interior package. So it was around textiles and furniture and all this, creative stuff. And, it evolved with different clients and kind of what I did with clients. I worked with the University of Michigan for 20 years, like the campus and the health system. And then I kind of moved into corporate. So there was a variety of things I did, but, towards the end, I just felt like I wasn't being challenged enough. It's that thing with ADHD. It wasn't interesting me anymore. And so I could not focus. I mean, I would, it was the whole breadcrumb thing. I did a lot of work from home actually. And I would find myself somewhere doing something and then wondering how I got there, what I'm doing. And I kind of go back and trace my steps. And then I finally land myself back at my computer where I'd have an open email with clearly I was trying to attach something. And I have no idea who I'm emailing, what I was doing, what attachment I was after. Don't even know how I got up from the computer. It was just like torture to make myself do the things. And especially if it was really detailed, if it was really going to take concentration on something that I just didn't interest me. It was just torture. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I feel like you just described my morning so many times, right? Where I go to open my email and next thing I know, I'm like, where am I? What was I doing?
Yes.
I have to rein myself back to the original task. That's very relatable. But it's funny because I feel like this podcast, this job, this path I've been on is the longest I've done anything. And so I'm often now curious through the lens of ADHD. I'm like, why is it so fascinating and why is it so interesting? And I think it's like you said, it's like that recognizing if something stops being interesting, I just pivot immediately, right? Or I'm like, oh, it's time to start a new course or something. I've built it into my job now, as opposed to all of the times in the past where I had started a job and immediately was like, oh God, I've hit a wall and nobody wants to work with me and this is terrible and I'm terrible and I'm a failure. Like all those ways in which I would kind of go to that place of negative self-talk as opposed to being like, no, actually, I just need to light it, find something new to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So coaching feels like a really great career for not only for people with ADHD in terms of being coached, but then also as a career for somebody with ADHD because it has that built-in malleability to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also, combined with the diagnosis and my age, what I find with clients this age is that people begin to wonder if they're doing something that they feel is purposeful, is meaningful. And that's something that I really enjoy about coaching. I feel like I'm doing something meaningful and providing value. And that just becomes, I think, really important as we get older.
Yeah, well said. So I want to hear about who your clients are, because I know you work specifically with women who are over the age of 50, but are really feeling stuck, I guess, right? And, who are some of your ideal clients?
I work with women who are over 50 generally, who are starting over in some way. It could be literally or just kind of in a sense of identity. So that could be empty nesters who maybe have kind of lost themselves in a mom role for 20 plus years. Many people are able to be mothers and not have that happen, but I know there are many women that kind of have lost themselves in that process. Late in life divorcees, honestly, people with ADHD at diagnosis, because that kind of blows your whole self-identity to pieces. It's just a complete reframe, right? And also just, I think in general at this age, people that are kind of sense that they're kind of on autopilot, that they're just sort of on default and want to pause and kind of reassess. I think there's something about the age of 50 that is kind of kicks in this like sense of time slipping by, like a sense of restlessness and an increasing urgency. And that always makes me think of Brene Brown's quote, says like, midlife is when God shakes you on the shoulders and said, we're not fucking around anymore. So, yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah. Well, and I think also there's sort of a panic, right? I certainly, I mean, I'm 48, but I have a lot of anxiety about retirement and, you know, what happens if my husband dies or leaves me, right? Like I have a lot of anxiety around who's going to take care of me when I'm old and can't take care of myself. Like a lot of fear around loneliness and abandonment that I obviously never experienced when I was younger. And so I think that plays into a lot of that, never feeling like an adult, right? Never sort of feeling like I'm not going to be able to take care of myself much longer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, I've heard a lot of women over 50 say proactively, I'm beginning to wonder what I want to be when I grow up. And, and I think that also kind of speaks to the fact, really, that many women have spent decades taking care of other people. And that, you know, that's a whole nother layer, sort of this society and patriarchy and women, and particularly women of our age, my age, who, you know, have grown up in this culture where we're meant to serve, you know, and that being selfless is something that's put on a pedestal as some sort of saint. But selfless means not having a self. And I think that's a tragedy, not something to be celebrated. So I think that underlies, you know, everything with women in this age group, and then coupled with, you know, just the sense of time going by and, you know, do I enjoy what I'm doing? What am I going to do in the future? And is it meaningful? And where do I begin? You know, and I think I have found that a lot of people are thinking about these things increasingly, but then kind of slip back into autopilot, and then find themselves in the same place, you know, a year later.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think also this is where the executive function piece comes in for a lot of us, which is we have so much anxiety about the future because we really struggle with planning and we struggle with, organization. And so we're experiential learners for the most part. And so I think it can be really difficult to think like, I don't know what my next steps are, and why talking it out and having a coach or a therapist who can really kind of allow you to sort through the trash, as I like to call it, and kind of like verbally work through, okay, what would my next steps look like? And what are the planning and the problem solving and the things that we really, really struggle with on our own, and why we kind of feel like, oh God, I have all this anxiety because I can't figure out I don't feel any sense of confidence about how I would approach some of these bigger life issues. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I think that there's a tendency to kind of have anxiety if you don't know the end point or how to get there, and feeling like that, you need to have a plan to get from A to Z, versus kind of figuring out how you can take one step towards Z and create a plan, but you don't have to know how to get to Z to start in that direction.
Right. Yeah. I think it's kind of coupled with that sense that we have to figure it all out on our own. And where there's like, how do we begin to unpack where that comes from? I think, like you said, a lot of it comes from being how we're socialized, which is like, we have to figure this out. We got to work harder. I just need some time. If I had a couple hours of real focus time, I'd be able to figure this out, as opposed to really kind of getting to that point where it's like, no, this isn't something I can figure out on my own. I need help.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so the other thing I love is that your coaching is called Triple Moon Coaching. Can you tell me a little bit more about the Triple Moon?
Yeah, so I was searching for something that sort of inherently symbolized women, because that's my client base, and a rebirth, kind of a cycle of life in a rebirth. So I looked at all sorts of, there's so many, flowers and trees and animals and so many things. But when I saw the meaning of triple moon and the symbol, I just kind of knew that was it, because it represents the three phases of the moon, represent the three phases of a woman's life, from the maiden to the mother to the crone, as she's often called, but also matriarch, and I kind of prefer the matriarch word. And so I sort of think of my work as being straddling the two, from mother to matriarch, and kind of holding the both at the same time. And, and the matriarch serves as sort of a guide of a wisdom for previous selves, and then, the connection with the lunar cycles to women, also kind of brought in the spiritual nature, because I am a holistic coach. So, I look at the mind, body, and soul as one. We kind of work from the inside out. And so that really just kind of, for me, captured, the essence of what I'm doing and who I work with.
I love it. It's such beautiful imagery. And I really love thinking about and embracing the idea of cyclical energy, cyclical productivity, cyclical progress, right? As opposed to feeling like we are always supposed to be on this upward trajectory, which is I think misconception. And so, right, like I think there's something very organic and like fertile about cyclical energy.
Yeah, and I think as you say that, I'm just thinking there's also, I think, for me, maybe it's something that flows well with ADHD, that it's cyclical and fluid, and because things that are just very rigid just don't work well, and I'm just thinking about planning things and calendars, and I don't know, it just seems like something more organic like that is, what am I trying to say? Is more in line with our energy.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I think oftentimes especially when it comes to energy, like hyper focus and burnout, right?
Yes,
like it's really,
exactly.
my ADHD diagnosis has really helped me have a lot more grace around when I'm recharging and when I need to just lie around and rest, because chances are I was just in a phase of like intense energy. And while I love the intense energy, it's not sustainable. And I think
Yes.
sometimes we forget that we need to stop and rest, and because we feel so alive when we are in our hyper focus phase, and we're like spending hours and hours and hours building a new website or creating a new business or something, but at the same time, like having rather than when you want to be doing those things but you can't get off the couch, I feel like I'm so much nicer to myself with those phases, as
Yes.
agonizing as they can be sometimes, to be like, no, this is where you rest.
Yeah, that was one of the big things of self-compassion for me. It was so liberating to understand the couch paralysis. Like that was one of the things that I couldn't just figure out, because, I'd have, list of things to do that I wanted to do. It included things I really wanted to do, but the more time I had, this was even worse on weekends, the more pressure I had, and I just soon was paralyzed and just lying on the couch, can't do anything. And then you just beat yourself up. Like, what is wrong with me? Why can I not get up off the couch? I don't feel depressed. That was the sort of the missing piece, right? Like, I'm like, I don't feel depressed, but I cannot do anything. And this is ridiculous. And so that was just so liberating with the diagnosis to understand that and to put that in context. Yeah.
Right? Because the mystery is solved. And then it's like, then you don't feel, you're not constantly going back to that place of what's wrong with me, right? You're sort of like, oh, okay, I see why this is happening.
Yes.
And well, it might be frustrating. At least there's a sense of like, okay, now I can, with the breadcrumbs, right? I can retrace my steps a little bit and figure out how this happened and then learn, how I can better manage this, right?
Right.
Or not, just enjoy binging a new show or something.
Yeah, just lean into it and know that,
right.
It's part of it and not fight it and not beat yourself up over it and just go with the flow.
Right. Yeah. I feel like I use that analogy too. The riding the wave and riding the current a lot more than I used to.
Yeah.
Now, one thing you talk about too with coaching is the right brain exploration and kind of really like leaning into and fostering some of that right brain creativity. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that is and how that works?
Yeah, I just, I kind of fold in my artistic background with the holistic approach to kind of have this creative framework where, there's a number of right brain activities that we can do. And that's tailored to kind of the specific, unique, ways that a client may learn, whether they're kind of visual or, like to write or, so there's a number of ways you can kind of tap into the right brain, but it allows us to get beyond thinking, to get beyond overthinking and just trying to figure something out in our head and kind of access this sort of nonverbal genius and kind of getting to your soul. And that's also ties into the holistic piece that, we say we want to, help women get their souls and their goals. But so, and when you can work with the right brain and left brain together, you're able to make new connections and kind of come up with solutions in ways that you're not really able to get to with just staying in the left brain analytical side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. And it also kind of lends to the same idea we were talking about of like having a guide, having a coach, having somebody who can kind of get you through some of this stuff that we might not be able to do on our own because we get trapped in that just do it, just try harder, just think harder. I think you said that on your website, just thinking harder. And I was like, oh yeah, I feel that. Right? I come across that, right? So many times I'm like, I just need to figure this out.
Yeah, exactly. So this kind of lets you loosen up a little bit and, and people don't have to be creative at all to benefit from this. There's exercises and, well, first of all, everybody's creative anyhow. A lot of people believe that they're not. Everybody is creative. Some people, I think, are scared off by that, and it's not like a third grade art class where you're going to draw your tree wrong and be shamed forever. So there's no wrong way to do it.
I love that. So now, looking back through this lens, what would you say you love about your ADHD? I love the multi-passionate part of it. I mean, it's just so fascinating to be involved in so many things and learn so many things. And I love talking to people with ADHD, and I think we're also drawn to each other because of the conversations we can have. And, it means that there's this continual need or passion to keep learning. So I love to learn. I think we all do. And I think also that's really good for the brain, for longevity and holding off dementia. So there's great benefits too. But I'd say that's probably my favorite thing. I do really like it when I'm in hyperfocus, other than just the passionate part, but just
I don't know, feeling super productive and just being able to, I don't know, blow through a list of 25 things in half an hour and feel like you're on top of the world.
Yeah, right. It's like all plates spinning, all guns firing, and yeah, it does feel good.
It does feel good. Yeah.
Now, I'd love to ask the question about whether you would, if you could rename ADHD to something else. Have you thought about what you would call it?
I have thought about that. What did I think it was, like, euphoric selective attention, discord or dissonance.
Okay.
So it's like, I was kind of coming from the angle of like, as you've said many times, it's not really attention deficit at all. It's the kind of the hyper focus. And so it's kind of getting around the piece that we can really focus on something as long as we're interested in it, and then with the hyper focus. So it's sort of like euphoric selective attention, but then there's this discord because it's not very practical, right? Like if you can only focus on the things that you're super passionate about, then you get to the executive dysfunctioning problems.
Right. Yeah. I really like the name Discord because we've talked about how disorder feels a little too clinical, but at the same time, like it really can be quite debilitating. And so syndrome doesn't feel debilitating enough. And so, but yeah, Discord sort of really gets to the heart of like, well, there's a dysregulation there. It's like, it's not acting in a way that I feel like I have control over or that is necessarily always positive.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was. Yeah, I kind of played around with a bunch of words, and that's kind of exactly how I landed on that. Or dissonance was kind of similar, but yeah, disorder sounds just so medical, clinical, negative.
Yeah. And I'm curious, how is your daughter doing in terms of her diagnosis and college? Because I know that's a really, really difficult time for a lot of us. At least for me, it was.
Yeah, she's doing well. She's in Spain right now on a semester abroad. So,
Nice.
it's a completely new environment. I think she has some medication with her, but she's not taking it. And so the way she's managing it right now, I think, is if she really needs to get something done and she cannot focus and she just, can't do it, she might take an Adderall so that she could focus and just knock something out. So she's kind of using it more as an as-need basis and going to regular therapy and fish oil supplements and
on the adventure of a lifetime. So that's like, that's got to be exciting. Yeah, that's awesome. Is it just the one daughter?
I have an older daughter who's in Portugal right now, actually in graduate school.
Wow. Okay. Gosh, I love Portugal. Okay. And so what about your other daughter? Is she curious or is she very clearly neurotypical or?
I don't think she has ADHD. Both my kids have anxiety, which is not surprising. My mother has generalized anxiety or disorder. I think I do as well. So, but she doesn't, because I've gone back through the filter of what I know now, really, and gone back, and I don't see that in her. And she's aware of it now too. I mean, she knows now what the symptoms are that we've discovered, and she doesn't resonate with it. So,
so interesting, right? Going through our family trees and trying to figure out where everybody sits on this spectrum.
Yeah. My mother's definitely so incredibly ADHD. It's fascinating to think back to my childhood. Like I just have visions of like the kitchen, like you would go down and she'd have like spoons all over the place, like on the counter. And I just envisioned so clearly, like having a damp paper towel that she's wadded up. That's like, she starts to wipe up some coffee grounds and like maybe a little bit of spaghetti sauce, and then it sits in the middle of in the counter just to be forgotten. That was
Wow.
just, very regular, and talking with a knife, while the burner's on the stove with nothing on it, and just gesticulating with the chef's knife. And yeah, she was Hurricane Gladys.
Well, I feel like, I talk so much about domesticity and women and some of the really difficult struggles. So many of the things that we struggle with are things that we, have to do with running a household, right? And as women, a lot of that falls to us. And then I'm like, can you imagine having ADHD and being a mother in like the 60s or even earlier, where it was like your whole, so much more of your life and worth was tied up in a lot of this crap that we all hate. Like it got, I'm like, God, I have it much better than my parents' generation in terms of what women had to face and make their lives, had to, whatever the word I'm looking for, just like had to be so central to their identity.
Yeah, I really have compassion for my mom when I think back to it, because she was a mother in the 60s. She was an only child. She really had no domestic history whatsoever. She was a dancer, studied with Martha Graham, and she came from living in Manhattan in the 50s, and then suddenly somehow was an academic wife, with 2 kids. She choreographed through my brother's pregnancy, and then she would stay at home. And, my father grew up in the Midwest, was expecting pies and all this stuff, and she just hated to bake, and, completely had ADHD, and just, flour all over the place. Like, we just knew, like, just do not go in the kitchen when mom's in the kitchen. Like, just stay clear. And yeah, it must have been just horrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and so challenging. Yeah.
My mother, I can't decide. My mother had passed before my diagnosis, so my journey, and like I so badly want to go back and talk to her about this, because sometimes I'm like, God, she must have. But, a lot of it I chalked up to her just being a feminist who was really dissatisfied with with stay-at-home motherhood. And she always was like, had side hustles and always had was working on a career, and she put herself through college after she put all of us through university. And so it was like all of these things that I see in her where I'm like, wait, is that ADHD, or was she just like a dissatisfied mom?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, maybe that's all it was, but yeah.
Maybe both.
Right. Probably. So now I love this idea of just reinvention. And because you're right, I feel like that's what we talk about on this podcast, which is like, it is such a profound re-articulation of who we are in this world when we get this diagnosis. And it's really difficult to explain to other people who don't understand or have gone through this, right? And that's often our partners or our family members. And it can feel it can feel very lonely a lot of the time when we're not talking to each other and finding each other. So I love your approach in terms of just like recognizing that there is this sense of rebirth, that it's not just about like, oh, well, this is the rest of my life now. I guess I'm trapped here.
Yeah, it's really a complete reframe of your entire life from whenever you get diagnosed to just complete reframe. And now with this information, what do you do with it? What does that open up for you? And, and like you said, it's not, you can't fix it, but just knowing that you have it and having the understanding and just goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. With help. Always with help.
with help. Absolutely. Yes. You definitely best to have support. Yeah.
Well, congratulations on this new venture and coaching. I think it's a wonderful endeavor. And I think I'm obviously a big fan of coaching, and I think it's so important. So, how can people find you and reach out to you and work with you?
Well, I have a website, which is triplemooncoach.com, and it's coach, not coaching, because that domain was not available. So triplemooncoach.com. And then I'm also on Instagram at triplemoon_coaching. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. Those are kind of the platforms I'm using. And there's, a lot of information on the website and ways to book a discovery call. So right now I'm also offering kind of a complimentary combination discovery call where we can talk about coaching, what it is, what it isn't, answer any questions they may have, get to know each other a little bit, see if it's a good fit. And if so, talk about what the programs are, but also including a 30-minute coaching session so that someone's able to experience that as well. So that can be booked either on my website or there's a link tree in my Instagram or in my Instagram highlights under Work With Me. Yeah.
Awesome. It is a beautiful website, by the way. Kudos to your designer. It's just gorgeous. I really enjoy it. And it feels like, it's almost like, I just really liked the journey of going through your website and reading all the things about you. And I'm like, usually I have no attention span for copy on websites. Usually I'm like, get to the point. But it's like really, it was very beautiful and lovely, and really enjoyed. It was like an experience, like a narrative experience.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback, and I could not be happier. I worked with this woman named Lise, Liis. She's with her own company. She's an entrepreneur at Sparkle Creative Studio. Anyone is looking for branding or a website, highly recommend. She's just a joy to work with and really responsive and so creative. She's just brilliant. So I could not be more happy with the site. Yeah. She's great.
Yeah, I know. I definitely was like, ooh, I went down and looked at some of her other work too, because I was like, ooh, she checks a lot of boxes.
Yes, she does.
Okay, good. Shout out to Lise. Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you so much, Susan. I really enjoyed listening to your perspective. I feel like, so feels like we kind of touched on a lot of the topics that are specific to this late in life, mature diagnosis experience that I certainly felt like I had, and what kind of makes it feel different when you're diagnosed this late in life as opposed to, say, in your 20s, but at the same time, how important it can be, right? To really follow that diagnosis and not just listen to your doctor if they're like, it's what, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, who cares, right?
Yeah. And I think that it's so common now to have late diagnoses. I think there's so many women that are midlife and above that are undiagnosed. And I know for me, like, I didn't know anything about it because there's just this association with boys that can't sit in their chairs. I don't think it's widespread knowledge of the way that it can present in women and in adult women and what that means. So I just think as the awareness is growing, I think more and more people, in midlife are getting diagnosed at this point.
Yeah, right. And connecting the dots, but also I think there's something about midlife that is one of the developmental catalysts for a diagnosis, because we're coming at a lot of these stages, like you said, of the what's next, and I feel like I don't have focus, and all of those things that really bring up the ADHD traits more than they might in other aspects of, in other phases of our life. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
I appreciate you having me on so much. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for letting me share my story. I just love your podcast, and we'll continue to binge listen to it. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Susan. It's been a real pleasure.
Okay. Thank you.